I'd like to call the meeting to order. Would you please call the roll?
Mayor Jorgensen.
Present.
Commissioner Wygand.
Present.
Commissioner Kaler. Commissioner Crowley.
Present.
Commissioner Skidmore.
And present.
Well, we have a quorum here this morning. Today is Wednesday, June 19th. Welcome to the last meeting of spring 2019 of the regular City Commission. We'll lead the meeting starting with the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by the invocation by Pastor Todd Miller with the Cherry Street Wesleyan Church. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Awesome. Thank you for inviting me here to invoke the Holy Spirit's presence upon us. Before I get started, though, I want to share something with you. I've been going through the book of Kings. You know, history is a good teacher. We learn from our past mistakes, past successes, and so on and so forth. And Scripture in the book of Kings tells us story after story of all these leaders who failed and who succeeded. And it's no surprise that all the godly leaders succeeded. First function I went to as a pastor here in this town, the mayor at the time stood up and prayed for the gathering, and I thought, I'm in the right city. This is an awesome opportunity for the Lord to work. And so my prayer today is you all continue to seek Him. And I'm also reminded that King Solomon surrounded, in chapter 4 of Kings 1, King Solomon surrounded himself with these godly leaders to help him. So it didn't all fall on him. And my prayer is also that you all, you godly leaders, surround yourselves with godly folks to help you do what you're doing, the wonderful job that you guys are doing. And first and most, seek the Holy Spirit to lead you like these leaders did. Continue to seek Him, and you will continue to do great things for the people of this city. We thank you for that. So let's do that. Let's invite the Holy Spirit to join us in this meeting and all the meetings later on. Bow with me. Heavenly Father, it is your words that teach us to follow you, teach us to seek you, to seek your Holy Spirit, to seek your wisdom as King Solomon did. We can't lead without you. We can't lead in a godly way without you. So at this time, we ask you to infill these leaders with your Holy Spirit. We invite that Holy Spirit to join in the leadership of this awesome city. May you continue to shine your light upon Ottawa, upon these leaders, so that we, the city of Ottawa, can go on proclaiming your name above all names. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. That'll move us on to the consent agenda, which includes the minutes from the June 3rd, 2019 study session and June 5th, 2019 regular meeting. Also, the appointment of Dennis Tharp, our Director of Utilities, to the Kansas Municipal Gas Agency Board of Directors for a 2-year term, and the appointment to boards and commissions of candidates for the Planning Commission, Donnell Dodson, Stephen Bradley, and Cal Lannis, and the Board of Zoning Appeals, Lucinda Cox, as well as the entire agenda. Do I hear a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I so move we approve this consent agenda.
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded as such. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. That moves us on to the regular agenda. Public comments. Persons who wish to address the City Commission regarding items on the agenda may do so as that agenda item is called. Persons who wish to address the City Commission regarding items not on the agenda and that are under the jurisdiction of City Commission may do so at this time when called upon by the mayor. Comments on personnel matters and matters pending in court or with other outside tribunals are not permitted. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes, and any presentation is for information purposes only. No action will be taken. I understand we do have a public comment on one of the agenda items. I'll call upon her at that time. Do we have any other registered to speak?
No one else has registered.
Okay, thank you. At this time, I'd also like to give the commissioners a chance to declare any conflict or communication that they've had which might influence their ability to consider today's issues impartially. Okay, that'll move us on to new business, item 12.
Request for approval of bid recommendation for Proximity Park sanitary sewer improvements.
A total of 5 bids were received for the sanitary sewer improvement project at Proximity Park. PEC, our engineering firm, recommended the contract be awarded to the low bidder, and the commission agreed. The low bidder subsequently withdrew their bid and gave notice that they would not perform. PEC recommends the commission award the bid to the second lowest bidder, SiteRight, in the amount of their bid for $2,147,087.50, contingent upon the approval of the bid by USDA. This also authorizes the city manager to sign necessary documents for the project as needed. And we have our city attorney, Blaine Finch, as well as Dennis Tharp, our utilities director, available to speak on this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. We did talk about this, I think, extensively on Monday in your study session regarding the fact that the city had awarded this at its last meeting 2 weeks ago to Matador Construction, a company here in Franklin County, who the next day let us know that they were withdrawing their bid. And so under the law, the city has the opportunity to go to the next lowest bidder in an attempt to be efficient and still get the project done for the folks in the community. There was a wide spread on bids in this case. We're going from a bid of $1.5 million to $2.1 million, but all of the bids beyond SiteRights go up from there. So our recommendation to you, rather than rebidding this project because it's so fresh, the last time we let bids, we're still, in fact, within the 60-day date that all bids are supposed to remain open to acceptance, that we probably won't get better bids at that point. In fact, we'd probably have fewer bids and not realize as good a bidding cycle as we did this time. So we do have Bob Koopman from PEC here, the city's engineer on this project, who can answer questions, as well as Mr. Tharp or myself, and we'll stand for questions at this time.
Okay. Any questions for Blaine or for Bob? I think we went through this extensively at our study session on Monday.
All right, well, Blaine, I guess, yeah, this is unusual to go through this ordeal. At the same time, I guess that's why we have multiple bids. We had 5 on this one, and so it allows us easy access to go to the next lowest bid, which was SiteRight. Where is SiteRight located, do you know? They're out of?
Kansas City, Missouri.
Are they? Okay.
KC
Not too far away.
Commissioner, I would agree with you. This is fairly unprecedented that we have a low bidder completely withdraw their bid and back out on the project. So the citizens do know there is a bid bond, and Public Work in Kansas requires a bid bond with a penal sum of 5%, meaning that if a bidder does withdraw or fails to enter into a contract with the owner, there is a penalty of 5% of their bid amount that has to be paid. In this case, that's about $75,000 on the Matador bid of $1.5 million. And we have already sent claim to the surety asking for that penal sum to be paid to the city.
I might ask Bob to refresh our memory on how long this is anticipated, the construction project is anticipated to take. And then also, and maybe this might be a question for Dennis, is what additional work needs to be done on the site, utility-wise, to complete the project?
Bob Koopman with Professional Engineering Consultants, Topeka, Kansas. In answer to your question, I believe it's 6 months. It may be 7 months.
Okay.
6 months for substantial completion, 7 for final,
Okay.
is my recollection.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Bob.
And I'm not going to contradict, but I have it in front of me, and it's 240 days is what's there. And then as far as completion on the site, the sewer is a big one, of course. And we hope to get as much of the work that's in this bid done as possible. And then we are working right now on the contracts, and you should see them fairly quickly on the electric side. As you know, we went out for bond money. We went out for a $5 million bond sometime back. The half-cent sales tax is in place to take care of the infrastructure out there. The water line is complete. With one small exception, we've got one building to hook up across Kingman when all of that intersection work takes place. But beyond that, the electric and the sewer are probably going to break loose fairly close to the same time. And I don't have a timeline on the electric right at this point in time. I would say it'd be someplace close to what the sewer will be, actually. So 8-10 months from now, we should be infrastructure pretty much done out there.
And the power, of course, the engineering has been progressing on that, and it's the design is
The design is done.
done. Good.
Yeah, we are actually extending our Circuit 11, which goes across and feeds Love's, which is across the highway. We're going to extend that into the park, and then we will have another, out of our southeast substation, we'll have another circuit coming out of there, which you all have not seen maybe, but have heard about the transformer that we set and all of the necessary components to provide power to that circuit going into the park, which will basically encompass the park at that point in time. It'll go clear down Montana and then Kingman to across the creek right there about the bridge.
Okay, all right, thank you. And thank you for indulging me on just the point of information there. We want to get back to this item. Is there any other questions for any of these individuals on the item at hand?
Well, I might add that we discussed previously, too, that the increased cost we'll have to incur here with Site Right, as we've been able to enjoy some savings on the water line. Is that correct, in the amount of excess of this increased cost, or about the same? I don't remember
I'll
exactly
defer
what.
cost to Dennis, but I do know we did talk Monday about most of the infrastructure projects seeing some cost savings, but I'll let Dennis talk about the actual work done by our folks, I think, in putting line in.
Yeah, and yes, we did see substantial cost savings on the water line project. I don't think that really says anything to what we are dealing with right at this point in time. I would say it maybe kind of goes the other way. We have a commitment of $500,000 as part of the USDA process, which will come out of that bond money. By the time we finished with that and the other work that has been completed, we have basically enough money to finish the electric project at that point in time. And that's the first one. And I think you all knew from the get-go that this is first stages. You know, we've got a pump station for the water line that will need to be built at some point in time. There's a water tower that at some point in time will likely have to be built. Very possibly could take another substation across the highway on the electric side. So as much as we've completed a lot of work, as we see people come in there, it could take more work to get where we really want to be with this project.
Makes my main point was we're pretty much on budget, aren't we, with regard to the proximity
Right
part?
now, I think for what we've wanted to complete, yeah, we're pretty much dead on budget, actually, yeah.
Good. Very good.
The other two issues, Commissioner, that we did talk about with cost savings on Monday were acquisition of easements, which we have worked on, and in many cases, the landowners out there have donated easements to the city. We have not had to pay additional costs for easements. And then the other piece of that was the legal work that was included in USDA's bid that we've actually absorbed internally and taken care of. So I think we will see some savings even over the USDA estimate on this phase of the project.
Good.
Well, with those answers to my questions, I make a motion we approve item number 12 on our agenda.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the bid recommendation on item 12. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, let's proceed to vote.
How do you vote, Commissioner Wygand?
Yes.
Commissioner Crowley?
Yes.
Commissioner Skidmore?
Yes.
Mayor Jorgensen?
And I vote yes, motion carries. Item 13.
Acceptance of the fiscal 2018 financial audit.
The 2018 financial audit was prepared by Mize Hauser and Company. We have Audrey Oderman with the company here to present the audit.
Good morning, everybody. I'm here to go over the financial statements and then answer any questions that you may have. I want to start on page 1, and that's page 1 of the bound copy. If you're looking at an electronic copy, it might be a little bit different, but it's the independent auditor's report. So on that page, we discuss management's responsibility for the financial statements and the auditor's responsibility. That particular part of the financial statements goes through and it talks about the auditing standards that we use, as well as the components of the financial statements that we did do an audit on. If we look on the bottom of page 1, We talk about an adverse opinion, and that's simply just discussing the fact that these financial statements are not in accordance with GAAP, that they are in accordance with the regulatory basis of accounting, which is what the city has always intended to use. So that's just an explanation of that difference between those two bases of accounting. We go on to page 2, the actual opinion of the financial statements over the basis of accounting is the second paragraph. It's an unmodified opinion over the regulatory basis of accounting. It's the highest opinion that these financial statements can receive over that basis of accounting. It speaks to the work that your staff does under your direction. They treat us very professionally when we're out here and get us the information very quickly, and we do appreciate that. There's just a couple of pages that I want to highlight in these financial statements, and the first one is page 3. This is a particularly good statement, I believe, to look at because it's a summary of the whole financial statement. It pulls it all together in one page. So if there's a constituent that has questions over a particular fund or what the cash balance was, this is a really good place to direct them because it's one page with all the funds and all the activity of the city brought together. And then the other summary page is actually on page 15, so it's quite a bit ahead. It's after the note disclosures. And this one actually just shows the budget that was approved for this particular year by fund and the amounts that were expended by fund. So you can see the difference between what was budgeted and what was expended. You can see in the variance column that there weren't any funds that were over budget for this particular year. As part of the audit, we're also required to let you know if we believe there were any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses. We did not note any of those during our audit. We're also required to let you know if we believe there's non-compliance with laws and regulations as they relate to these financial statements, and we did not note that as well. Is there any questions that you have for me?
Any questions for Audrey? Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, I'll entertain a motion to accept the 2018 financial audit.
Mr. Mayor,
Commissioner,
I'll make that motion to approve item 13.
okay. It's been moved. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
It's been moved to accept and seconded to accept item 13, which is the acceptance of the financial 2018 audit. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, let's proceed to vote.
How do you vote, Commissioner Skidmore?
Yes.
Commissioner Wygand?
Yes.
Commissioner Crowley?
Yes.
Mayor Jorgensen?
And I vote yes, motion carries. Item 14.
Public hearing to consider override of the State Historical Preservation Office's ruling on proposed remodel of 401 South Main.
Okay, at this time, I shall open the public hearing, and we shall have a presentation by staff.
Good morning again, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. This is a process set forth in Kansas statute about how we preserve our history in this state, and the statutes themselves have been interpreted by several court decisions through the years, a couple coming out of Lawrence, one out of Beloit, and the most recent one in 2013 coming out of Topeka. And I need to go through with you your role this morning because it's different than the things that you've already done this morning on the agenda and a lot of the other things that you will do on the agenda this morning. This is one of those times when you sit not as a legislative body with authority to make law for the city, but you sit in a quasi-judicial role, meaning that you are more like a court who weighs evidence and comes to a determination and decides these questions that are presented to you. Under the law, when you act as a quasi-judicial body, you have to act within the scope of your authority, which is this morning to consider whether or not the SHPO's decision, the State Historic Preservation Officer, will be overruled. Your decision must be supported by substantial, competent evidence, and your decision must not be fraudulent, arbitrary, or capricious. So this will be one of those times we slow down and we have a public hearing and we listen to everyone, and your discussion today, as memorialized in the minutes, will be sent to the State Historic Preservation Officer within 5 days, and they will make a determination about whether they will proceed to appeal or whether any other party may appeal your decision this morning. So we want to make sure that we get it right, that we take our time, and that we have a robust discussion about the things that you have to decide this morning. That Beloit case that I talked about is famous for coming up with the application of the hard look standard. That is a federal law standard that has been imported into Kansas law. And the hard look standard says that you this morning must take a hard look at all relevant factors and, using plain common sense, base your determination on the evidence. What determination are you making this morning? Under the statutes, you as the governing body of this political subdivision have to make a determination based on the consideration of all relevant factors that there is no feasible and prudent alternative to the proposal, and that the program includes all possible planning to minimize harm to such historic property resulting from such use. As if that weren't enough to keep in mind, all of those terms are further defined in Kansas administrative regulations, so I'm going to share those with you too. The phrase feasible and prudent alternative is defined as an alternative solution that can be reasonably accomplished and that is both sensible and realistic. When you're determining whether a prudent and feasible alternative exists, you have to require consideration of things like technical issues, design issues, the project's relationship to a community-wide plan, if there is one, and Wendy will talk about that after the other folks have spoken this morning, and economic issues. So all of those factors can be considered. Remember, it's not that you're determining that there is no alternative. It's likely that there is always some alternative. The question is whether the alternatives presented are feasible and prudent. And so you can rely on those technical issues, design issues, project's relationship to community plan, and economic issues in deciding and weighing whether or not you believe an alternative is feasible or prudent. The phrase program includes all possible planning to minimize harm is defined as that the written evidence and materials submitted by a governmental entity to the State Historic Preservation Officer. So remember, when you're done here today, your decision, the minutes of this meeting, any written documents that you rely on, and ultimately the resolution that you pass, if you pass one, will all be packaged up and sent to SHPO for their review and consideration. And that will be the record of what's happened here, just like a court transcript is sent on to an appellate court. So if all of that written evidence and materials submitted by you to the SHPO clearly identify all alternative solutions that have been investigated, compare the difference among those alternative solutions and their effects, and describe mitigation measures proposed by the project proponent, in this case Mr. Walker, that address an adverse effect determination of the State Historic Preservation Officer. You had such an adverse effect determination. That's in the letter from SHPO that's in the packet that you received on Monday. And so he will be presenting to you today and talking about whether or not and what steps he's taken to mitigate that determination. Finally, the term relevant factors is also defined, and that means pertinent information submitted by project proponents or project opponents in written form, including evidence supporting their positions. So if someone gives you something this morning and we take it into the record, you want to make sure that you're cognizant of that. Also, as you take notes this morning, for your benefit and for the benefit of the discussion that will take place after you close the hearing, I invite you to be specific in your conversations about what factors you're thinking of or looking at. Talk specifically about alternatives if you hear them. I would note that the first alternative and the only alternative that's been presented so far is the one from the SHPO, and that's basically leave the building as it is. And that is always an alternative. The question is whether it's a feasible and prudent alternative given the community's master plan and all these other factors that we're going to look at this morning. So I just want to make clear that that these are the steps we follow. If you have a question at any point in this process, I want you to ask me. The case decided in 2013, the Friends of Bethany Place versus City of Topeka, that concerned a parking lot next to a church in downtown Topeka. The church wanted to put in a parking lot in this space called Bethany Place, which was part of a historic environs, kind of flashbacks to the Ottawa University parking lot conversation. And they ended up getting sued, and that case went all the way to the state Supreme Court. And the state Supreme Court kind of changed the law as we understood it about this. And it's very important for our conversation this morning. They said, we used to believe the burden of proof to show that there was no feasible and prudent alternative was on the project proponent or the project opponents who were presenting back and forth to the governing body. The Supreme Court in 2013 said that burden falls directly on the governing body. It is your job now to determine. And in the case of Bethany Place, they said the city had access to a planning staff and city engineers that could have gone out and looked at alternatives or created alternatives. They even had a historic ombudsman there in Topeka, and the court noted that they should have been coming up with alternatives. And so if there's anything you hear this morning that you say, I'm not convinced yet, I believe we need to look further at this alternative, you need to state that. And you can task your staff with looking into that and getting a report back to you. So if you cannot reach a decision this morning, based on all of the evidence before you that there are no feasible and proven alternatives, it's okay to continue this public hearing and ask staff to get you that information. If you are satisfied, after hearing all the evidence this morning, that there is no feasible and prudent alternative and that the project does take measures to minimize harm, then it's okay to approve that this morning and go ahead and vote on the resolution to override SHPO. But the burden is yours, so as you get close to a decision-making point, we may want to revisit that if you have questions about it. But I want you to know it's okay to have questions, it's okay to want more information, and because the burden has been placed on you based on the Supreme Court's decision, you're kind of the buck stops with you, as it were, to make sure that you have all the information and you've looked at all the alternatives that you think you need to satisfy your inquiry this morning. With that, I'll stop talking and stand for any questions you have.
I do have a couple questions to begin with. Can you give us a brief rundown on why SHPO was involved in the first place?
This building is a contributing resource to the Ottawa Central Business District. I don't believe the building itself is on the register, but the courthouse across the street is. And it's one of those buildings that they say, even though not necessarily on the register, contributes to the Ottawa downtown, which is parts of which are on the register. Obviously, it has a high profile. It is a corner building. It has 2 elevations and faces both Main Street and 4th Street and is part of the streetscape around the historic courthouse. So that's every time we're touching on that or dealing with historical environs, we have to report to the State Historic Preservation Officer, and they get to weigh in, Mr. Mayor, and they typically, what we've seen in the past, they typically deny projects and put it back on the governing body to make the determination. And that's why we're here this morning having this hearing.
And then the hearing, you indicated that it will be, that the documentation and the decision will be given back to SHPO, and they have what authority? Can they override what we determine? Can they accept it, or what's the outcome there?
Wendy wants to speak to this one.
Well, I just want to clarify a bit, so that when we created that downtown district, that's what puts them in place. So when a permit is applied for, or on the motion of the owner, they can go ahead and get that read, which is why we got the letter. Once we have notes, because we won't have full adopted minutes, but once we have the notes from today, then we would send it. They have 5 days to respond before we can actually issue the full permit. Sometimes they'll respond right away and say they're satisfied with the steps, but if they choose to intervene further, they can actually file a case to stay the, to prevent the project from going further until they've had an opportunity to actually proceed under a court system.
Okay, all right. Any further questions for Wendy or for Blaine?
Well, I guess I'll say this must be common around the state when we have many cities, and like our city, over 150 years old, where we want to preserve our historic buildings, at the same time looking at progress, and we have to look at buildings that want to be used in a different way and the functionality of our buildings today. This isn't the first time this has come up, I'm assuming.
No, it used to be when the statutes provided for environs, it was even more frequent. But because they've removed that condition, it is now buildings that are either on the historic district, or on the register, which as a district, Ottawa has. There are a number of other times in a given year that we may have a letter that is a disapproval. Mostly those are signs or something like that where they're asking for something different. But then the owner has the opportunity to decide if they want to pursue it or if they just want to provide an application that meets with the state's satisfaction. We have one other pending right now that the owners indicated that they want to go through the same process. the process is intentionally a little bit burdensome, okay? So we don't want people to think, and so because of that, there are definitely times that the owners elect to not pursue it any further. They either don't do the improvement, or they come back with an alternative that they believe can be done that meets their needs. It's just not what they initially wanted. But it's not uncommon. We haven't done one for a while, but.
I might,
Yeah.
at this point, outline the procedure that's going to occur at the hearing today. We've already opened the hearing. The city attorney has indicated what the process is and or how it'll work, and gave us an overview of it. And then we'll allow the applicant to make his request formally, and then we'll open it to any public support, and then to any public opposition, and then we'll give the applicant a chance to respond, and then we'll have community development staff comment on the comprehensive plan or any other factors. So, do you have anything further?
Mr. Mayor, just one other thing. I think you have a lot of folks this morning who want to speak to this, and that's great. I think let your questions, as you formulate them, let's focus on those prudent and feasible alternatives. Let's focus on mitigation to harm in your questioning. It's not simply, are there 10 other buildings that do something similar downtown? That's not really the question. The question is, are there prudent and feasible alternatives to this proposal? And then, does this plan or this program contain all possible planning to minimize harm to the historic building? So if you think those two things as kind of your guiding lights as you consider this morning, your questions will kind of go in that direction naturally. And I'll be here. If anything comes up during a presentation or a question you have, feel free to call on me, and we'll help as we need to.
Any further questions for our city attorney? If not,
As the testimony is going forward, should we hold our questions until after all presentations have been done, or question the presenter at the time they are at the podium?
That'd be completely up to the mayor. I've seen it done both ways. It's just a question of efficiency and how best you want to proceed, but neither one of them is wrong.
I believe if a question about something that's been stated arises, we ask that. If it comes up later, then we have the opportunity to go back. So, all right. Thank you, Blaine. At this time, I'll give the applicant a chance to make the request.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. Josh Walker, I'm the owner of Halloran Building LLC, which is the entity that owns 401 South Main. I am here today to ask that you override SHPO's decision and allow the project to move forward. I believe you have the application that I provided for the override, so I won't rehash all of that, but I would like to highlight just a few things, and then certainly I'll be available for any questions that you may have. Certainly we made a lot of effort in the design of the renovation to either bring back some historic elements or preserve what is there. As Mr. Finch alluded to, in some cases there isn't a prudent or reasonable alternative. Specifically, the storefront that existed when the building was original, we didn't have things like ADA during that time period, so some of that type of stuff isn't able to be accomplished in today's code and still maintain the accessibility. But for the rest of the building, the intent is to leave the window openings as they are on the upper level. The intent is to bring back window openings on the lower level that were there before the renovation that occurred in the 50s and brought the small windows that you see now. We're leaving the existing brick and restoring what we can, including some of those architectural elements that exist. We're actually salvaging brick as we're modifying the building. The original structure had a canted corner on the lower level. We're bringing back that, albeit not exactly the same as it was. The intent is to preserve what we can, mimic what we can, and provide a much improved building and asset for downtown. One thing I would like to also mention is that was important to us to the extent that I named the entity that owns the building after the man that built it in the first place. one of the benefits of an investment like this for a historic building is that it continues to be used. That ensures that it's going to be salvaged and not fall into disrepair. But I would add that my hope is that this sparks further investment in the downtown area, so that other historic buildings that contribute to the district will be improved and continue to be used. So that's all I have for you so far.
I've got a few questions for you,
Yes.
Mr. Walker. Do you know approximately how old the building is?
It was built in 1923.
1923. And what was its original use?
Originally, there was a parking garage on the upper level. There was, I can't remember the first business that was on the lower level, but there was parts manufacturing, distribution, that type of thing.
Okay, so it's been kind of a mix of industrial and retail use?
Initially, it was industrial, then at one point there was a grocery store in the lower level. In the 50s, it was renovated into a professional building, which has been its primary use since then.
Okay. And you provided a photograph from, I believe it was the late 50s of a grocery store, and that was that. To your knowledge, was that how the original building looked when it was constructed?
No, the grocery store went in, I believe, in the mid 40s.
Okay.
So that's not what it was originally.
Okay. Are you aware if there's any photographs older than the late 50s?
I don't have access, and I'm not saying that there aren't any out there, but I don't have any.
Okay. Okay. And approximately, how much is your budget for your proposed project on it?
If both floors move forward, the total project investment's $3.5 million.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Walker?
Josh, bear with me. I know most people don't know these answers. I'm just going to ask. You're a local resident, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you live in the city or within the city
Yep.
limits. So you're not just an out-of-town developer coming here to develop a project and move on. You're going to have some personal connection to this building.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. You'll drive by it every day and
Yes.
see
Absolutely.
the progress and so on and so forth.
Yeah, no, I
Okay.
appreciate you mentioning that.
Thank you.
Any further questions at this time?
Not at this time.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Josh.
All right.
At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing to any public support. Would anybody like to speak on behalf of the project? Could you please state your name and address for the record, please?
Sure. I'm Diana Starsinik-Dean. I'm the Executive Director of the Franklin County Historical Society. Thank you. I live at 832 South Cedar here in Ottawa, and my office is at the Old Depot Museum at 135 West Tecumseh. I'm passing around some photos. I spent yesterday going through thousands of photos, looking for any glimpse of this building to try to get as many different visual impressions of it as I could. And so what you'll see first is a photo of the Halloran Lumber Yard that was there originally. It burned down in 1922, and in 1923, a new building was constructed. And you'll see two articles, one alluding to the fire and the construction of the new building, and a second article talking about the Reinhardt Motor Company that was going in, which also included a gas station. And it's my understanding the 1924 Sanborn map also shows this. I have not yet found a photo of that building, and I sure tried. I'm working on it, though. You'll also see photos from the 1940s through the 1990s. And I pulled any photo, even if it just had a teeny tiny corner in there, because I wanted to give you as many opportunities to see how that building has evolved over the years. Some things you'll notice, the storefront windows, the entrance, the awnings, and the signage change over time. Things that are really retained, the brickwork, the footprint, and the second floor windows. And in fact, the second floor windows is why that building is so easy to spot in pictures. Originally, the historic Ottawa Business District, it was established in the 1970s, and it incorporated buildings on the 100 and 200 blocks of South Main Street. The courthouse was separately listed on the register in the 80s, and I believe 2008 is when that district was expanded to its current size, and this building was listed as one of the contributing buildings in its own right. What's interesting about this building is that in the application to include it in the district, the applicants acknowledge that the building has experienced many changes since the 1920s, but that those changes, and I quote, reflect the evolution of the building's role in the economy of downtown Ottawa. And that part of its story is that it's constantly changing. I appreciate the State Historic Preservation's Office's concern that the building may misrepresent past and present with some of the current proposed renovations. However, I think it's worth noting that this building has experienced numerous exterior transitions during its almost 100 years, yet in keeping elements that worked and changes that didn't, yet it manages to retain its presence. So here we are now, looking again at the evolution of the building's role in the economy of downtown Ottawa. Looking at the Main Street Association guidelines, the proposed design successfully maintains that continuous edge. The brickwork, we're reopening windows that have long been closed, and in my opinion, it does a great job to retain its essence, something that has not necessarily been done successfully with other buildings downtown. We have seen this building deteriorate. And although I've never been inside, I would assume that with missing windows on the second floor, there's water damage and critters living on the second floor. And I understand that second floor hasn't been in use for quite a while. My staff and I looked at the images that have been part of the proposed design, and we all agreed that it would contribute positively to the Main Street environment aesthetically and commercially. It would draw more foot traffic into the 400 block of South Main and drive that feeling of what that historic downtown should be. And we would much rather see 401 South Main continue to evolve in the economy of downtown Ottawa than to be here in 5 or 10 years discussing whether or not to tear this building down. But out of respect for the State Historic Preservation Office and my own thoughts on this building, if there's any feasible way to restore the essence of those second-story windows, that double 4/4 pane appearance, you will notice as you're flipping through those photos that is its most distinguished and consistent feature. And I know that there is additional cost to that, but in my opinion, that if there is a way to do that, that would be a very good way to maintain the appearance of that building, because it is very eye-catching. And just because I believe in teaching people the history of buildings, if there's an opportunity to create a space in this building to show images of the evolution of this building to further educate the public on how it's been used and how it's changed, this would also address the State Historic Preservation Office's concern about misrepresenting the building to the public. That said, it is my opinion that the City Commission should consider overriding the State Historic Preservation Office's ruling for the proposed remodel of 401 South Main. And that's all I have to comment.
Well, thank you for your comments. Do we have any questions for Mrs. Starsenekine?
Well, I just have a question here. I guess when we talk about historical preservation, we're not necessarily talking about taking these buildings to look back to the 1890s, but to look similarly to what they were when they were originally built. Is that right? Like 1920s?
It depends on if you're doing a restoration or a rehabilitation, and this is something that the Old Depot Museum actually dealt with as well. We were not trying to restore that building to be a train depot. We were trying to restore that, or to rehabilitate that building to be a usable building that respected the architectural features of the building. And this is a challenge that a lot of places face. I know Fort Scott had to make a decision about, are they telling the 1840s story of when their historic site was built, or are they telling the the Civil War story of that building, or how far back do they go? And so that's a discussion that can be had. That you're not necessarily having to go back, but it's just trying to preserve what's there. And my understanding is the State Historic Preservation Office's big concern was mixing and matching eras. But as you can see looking at those photos, that building has been in constant transition, and I think there are ways that we can respect that and make the building usable.
In these photos that you provided, I think it's interesting that the building has a combination or different types of brick in its construction. It has looks like blonde brick on the pillar on the corner, as well as the area of I assume was a supermarket at that time. Was that, to your knowledge, would that have been original with the two different colors of bricks?
I don't know the answer to that. I do know that the plan included a gas station originally, and it is possible that it was further modified when they moved to a grocery store. You'll notice that there is no road cut in the grocery store pictures, so clearly that corner was modified at some point to have a step-up curb instead of something you could, I mean, you wouldn't want to drive your brand-new cars over a sharp curb. But we haven't found a photograph to be able to verify what it looked like when it was originally built. I'm working on it, but I haven't
Okay.
found it yet.
Usually it seems like, especially what I've seen on Main Street, is that a different color brick was used when they could not match the original color, but the brick that was used on this building matched very well with the rest of the building. So, okay. Any other questions for our historic director? Okay, thank you. Okay, do we have any other people that would like to speak on behalf of the project? Any other people that would like to speak on behalf of the project? Mr. Cohen.
John Cohen, Chamber of Commerce, Ottawa 109 East 2nd Street, and I want to speak in favor of this project. I think that the way that the restoration has been suggested does a great job of respecting the historical integrity of our downtown while it continues to evolve to be an important part of the economic importance of that area of town. It will definitely bring more people into the 400 block and more people into the downtown area. This is something we should all be concerned with. I think anytime we see improvements like this in our downtown, then we stand to see more investment and more improvement in other buildings that have maybe been shuttered or maybe not being kept up as they have been in their former years. I think this is a wonderful opportunity to make an improvement, to make an economic investment in the downtown by a local person who is just as concerned about the downtown as all other residents are. When we get a local investor that's willing to make that kind of investment in the downtown, in the 400 block, respecting the historical integrity of our buildings down there, I think that's a great investment and something that we should support. So I speak in favor of the development and hope that we can go forward with it.
John, I do have a question for you. As a director of our Chamber of Commerce, and you have lived in Ottawa in the area
Yes.
for your entire life. To your knowledge, how long has the second floor been vacant?
I can remember as a boy that Moto Day was up there. It was a sewing factory, and they made Levi jeans or some product. I can remember when that was up there. I can't remember ever being up there specifically myself. I can remember when the Canted Corner was there. Mostly I remember the building as a professional building that was shared by doctors and dentists, and that's how I remember it best. But those are my recollections of that building.
And I've lived in Ottawa since 1987, and the upper floor has been vacant at least that long. So that's been 30-some years. And so you're an expert on economic development within our community. In your opinion, if there was a use for that second floor, would it have been filled in that time period?
I think the fact that it's stood vacant for as long as it has indicates, and the fact that we have trouble filling second floor, using the second floor in our downtown. Some have been successfully converted into apartments, but what Mr. Walker's suggesting, using this for housing, I think is absolutely fabulous. I think if it works out the way he's hoping, there'll be 38 beds or units up there, which puts that many more people in our downtown. It with the raised bulk food now serving as some sort of a grocery store with the type of food selections we have for restaurant, and we continue to get more recreation in the downtown. That's a great investment, and putting that many more people into our downtown on a regular basis is another way to continue to invest in our local community.
Good, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Cohen? Okay, thank you. At this time, I'd like to ask if there's anybody else that would like to speak on behalf of this project.
I'd like to ask Mr. Walker a question.
Sure.
If you come to the podium. From your construction experience, are brick walls more efficient than windows when it comes to heating and cooling?
Generally, your windows are the weak point in your building envelope. That being said, the way the buildings were built back then, the walls are going to be less efficient than the windows.
And then with regard to these apartments being upstairs, would it be normal to have apartments with windows the size of the original structure?
Those are certainly oversized if we were building a new apartment building.
Okay. And the building at the time it was built, apartments were not needed, whereas today our trend is it seems we have a need for downtown apartments.
As far as apartments go, yes. Housing downtown, this seems to be, the response has been positive, I'll put it that way.
Good. Okay, thanks.
City Attorney?
Mr. Mayor, if I could just ask a couple questions of Mr. Walker to get a couple of facts in the record. You indicate in your application to the city on the override application that you did consider restoring the storefront as originally constructed and decided against that based on ADA concerns?
Primarily, yes.
Were there any other concerns that would lead you away from that alternative to reconstruct it as a pre-1955 condition?
The design of the interior of the space didn't lend itself to partitioning off various areas to make it a suitable size to rent. And if I had built it like it was done pre-1955, that would have limited the way I could break up the building on the inside.
You indicate that you did consider restoring the existing upper-level windows, and there were some concerns there with being able to do that. Can you walk the commission through those concerns?
Sure, yeah, I went through a few things on the upper windows. You can potentially restore the windows that are there, but in doing so, they're steel frame, single pane, so there's no thermal break, certainly inefficient from an energy standpoint to Commissioner Skidmore's previous questions. So oftentimes when that is done, there's a second window installed or a storm shutter or something of some type to create that break. The challenge with the windows as they exist, a lot of the muttons are missing. There is extensive rust damage. So while it could be restored, it would be very laborious and expensive to get them brought back. The other alternative was to replace the windows with new windows of a similar profile. There are companies out there that make windows to match historic windows. Again, very expensive. One of the other concerns is the overall design at the end as well. The lower level is going to have a more modern storefront material, which is what's proposed throughout and is prevalent amongst several buildings downtown. So giving the building a consistent look from the exterior as opposed to modern storefront down below, and then something that's either refurbished existing windows or a mimicked historical window. We didn't like that look. So.
You had indicated that the total project cost could be $3.5 million?
Correct.
And looking at page 4 of your application, you've got the cost of using the alternative versus the cost of your proposal. It looks to be about $135,000 different.
That sounds right, yeah.
And that's about 3.84% of your total project cost. Can you speak to the economics of that, what that would mean for your fiscal projections of this project?
Well, it's a hit for sure. The motivation, I think, for me on this project goes certainly beyond the economics of it. I would probably say that I would sleep better just investing money somewhere else so that I don't have to devote so much emotional energy to. But as Commissioner Crowley alluded to before, I'm from here, I live here, I'm invested in the success of the community. I saw this as an opportunity where I could make an investment in downtown and hopefully give it a shot in the arm, continue to see further investment, build on the back of other successful projects like the historic post office renovation, Legacy Square. So the margins are thin is essentially what I'm trying to say. So something like that would be a significant hit.
And final question from me, if I may, Mr. Mayor. One of the issues that the board has to determine this morning are mitigation measures. You mentioned the candid corner as a potential mitigation measure. Can you walk through for the board other mitigation measures that you've taken to try to avoid an adverse effect determination by the SHPO?
So the vast majority of the existing brick veneer is going to be restored, tuck pointed, sealed, cleaned up, and that will remain, including some of the architectural features of the existing brickwork. We're restoring the existing openings on the north elevation that were there pre the 1950s renovation, particularly on the east side. And you can see in some of the older pictures.
You said the east side of the north elevation, not the east
Correct.
side of the building?
Correct,
Okay,
yes.
gotcha.
East side of the north elevation,
All
sorry.
right.
Continuous edge is being maintained. The doors are, some of the things that we're doing are to meet current codes. So those door recesses are there to allow accessibility so that we can ramp up into the existing building, things that weren't an issue with the previous corner as it was. And we're maintaining the window sizes. We're not modifying the windows upstairs. And the ones that we are adding down below will mimic the same size as the windows upstairs, so they're oversized.
Okay, very good. All right, thank you, Mr. Walker. I'll ask, are there any other public comments in support of the project? Kathy, would you please state your name and address for the record?
Yes. Kathy Sutton, address is 1026 South Hickory here in Ottawa. I am the president of the Ottawa Main Street. Even though our design committee had not had a chance to meet and go over these guidelines, we do understand that the Main Street guidelines are different than the state's guidelines, and that it does really meet the Main Street guidelines, and that we do support the renovation of the 401, because it, just like Mr. Cohen said, it'll really revitalize that fourth block. So we do support that. Just wanted to let you know that Ottawa Main Street was on board.
Okay.
And appreciated all the comments that Miss Diane had.
Sure. Thank you, Kathy. Any other comments in support of the project? Additional comments in support of the project? Call our fire chief.
I'm not going to support either way, but I want to give you some information on the life safety aspect. And I know we're talking about renovation and historical presence and all that, but as we move forward in downtown and we look at it as it from a fire department or from a code side of things, we do have to move forward with the codes and with the plans that have been already given to the city on the internal aspect of things. It meets all current codes. It'll be a fully sprinkled building, fully alarmed building, and that's one of our major concerns downtown is fire. As you know, this building now that Diane brought it was burnt down in 1922, and that's always a concern for downtown. And I can't support either way, but we do encourage people to remodel, and when they do, they of course follow all the current codes. But this will be a huge impact. Since I've been here since 1990, that has been vacant also. Anytime you have a vacant upstairs or a vacant building, period, we tend to see the building deteriorate, and this building needs attention. And but as far as the codes and moving forward, everything's been up to code. So.
Okay. All right.
I
Thank
just
you,
wanted to
Chief.
bring a
Chief
safety sign to
Mathias,
this. Yes.
to be clear, it's fully sprinkled upstairs and downstairs? It will be?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Depending on what is done upstairs, but yep, it will be.
That's what
fully
it's showing on the
sprinkled.
plans?
Yep.
To be, okay.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. All right, I'm going to ask 3 more times for public comments in favor of the project. Are there public comments in favor of the project? Additional comments in favor of the project? Final call for comments in favor of the project. Okay. At this time, I'll open it up to any public opposition to the project. And I'll ask 3 times for comments in opposition. Any comments in opposition? Last call for comments in opposition to the project. Okay, at this time, we'll give the applicant a chance to add any other comments that he'd wish to.
I think we covered everything, but certainly available for any follow-up questions.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Walker. Now we'll give our planning director a chance to talk on behalf of the comprehensive plan and other issues.
So Ottawa's comprehensive plan, we felt was important to convey as well, a little bit to you as a factor, and as our city attorney mentioned, that is something that can be weighed. So downtown, our downtown goals and sections advises that we want to promote housing. And my tenure with the city, it has also been vacant. And so the proposal to add units to the second floor and finally have a use up there certainly is in keeping with our comprehensive plan goal for housing. I would also just add kind of anecdotally that during my time both in the 90s as well as in the 2000s to now, we've had people approach us about possible uses up there. None of those have ever become feasible enough economically. The space is very large, and by the time people put their pen to paper, they couldn't make it work. So the economics of the situation do have bearing from my perspective, and and I think it's worth mentioning here that as a governing body action some time back, we reviewed this for a possible economic development incentive. And at the time, we had a feasibility study conducted. Our advisor conveyed to me quite clearly that, as the applicant said, this is very thin, that rents and income to offset the expense, there is risk here. This is not a very endowed project. And so I would, as the community development director, want to say that if I had to make a choice between the windows, as wonderful as they are and would be nice to have them, the sprinkler is far more important to us. Retaining the building through having those kinds of improvements and updating to the degree that this project proposes to do is also critical for retaining the building. And so I definitely want to say that. The second thing, as it happens in the residential mixed-use downtown economic development section, actually says promote and use tax incentives and explore funding options. And that is, again, to enhance our attractiveness for folks to make major investments in our downtown. And certainly we have made that an option with our neighborhood revitalization as well as the IRB incentive that you created. There were a couple of mentions about the Main Street downtown guidelines. Those are adopted as an appendix to our comprehensive plan because we didn't want to create another set of standards for people to look for. I think it's probably worth saying a couple of things, and some of this was mentioned. The guidelines like to create character where little now exists, advocating good design and proposing good urban design policies. As has been said, when the building was renovated in the 50s, it actually lost some of what would have been good character dimensions, and it lost its connection to the pedestrian space to be a nice place to walk by. The brick is very well matched, and if you didn't know better, you wouldn't even realize. And I thought some of the color images actually let you see that a little more than I've ever visually identified when I walked past there. One of the seconds, actually, in the main purpose is by advocating that new construction alterations be undertaken in conformance with accepted design standards. The guidelines help protect private property rights, values, and public investment. In addition, the program helps maintain the district's special historic character, which we've talked a little bit to as well. In the recommendation section, there's some comments about retaining architectural features and restoring some of that when possible, and the applicant addressed some of that, and I think that's in keeping as well. He mentioned the continuous edge. You will note that while there is some recess proposed in this, having that edge is also important, and so he's done a nice blend between having something that was there but still keeping a nice pedestrian way. And then the last one is about the window shape and pattern. At least the shape and pattern is, while the pattern is not fully the same, the window shape is, and that actually is important. if somebody wanted to come in 30 years and do another major renovation, and they felt it was important to restore to that level, and they had a vendor that could do that affordably, they still have the ability to do that. It would become much more cost prohibitive if the size of the windows were changed to ever create the opportunity for a full restoration. And while I understand that the state might prefer the building to remain vacant until a full restoration can be made, I am, as a planning person, completely diametrically opposed to that. It is important for our whole downtown and our community, our front door, as the mayor often says, to be as viable as possible all during the time and evolution that a structure has. So I believe that the applicant has done as good a job as possible given the economics of the situation, and certainly far better than anyone who's even begun to look at this building in my 25 plus years with the city.
Yeah.
So.
Ms. Lee, I believe part of the plans was to open, and was stated earlier, was to open those lower windows. Right now, they have the stools about 6 feet above the sidewalk level, and but that's going to be lowered down to mimic what the windows are up above. Is
Some of those window spacings that were there, he's opening back up, yes.
Okay.
And if you look at some of those images where he took a picture of the existing building, just vaguely, you can kind of see that, partially because the mortar is just a little bit different. Now, walking down there, honestly, I've not noticed it except for the one really big one. And so I know where to look. But yes, if people were to really go down and maybe sit at the Veterans Memorial and just stare at the north side, it would become more apparent to them where those changes were made in the 50s.
okay. Okay. Do we have any further questions for our planning director? Okay. Thank you. At this time, I will make a final call for anybody that would like to speak on this issue. Final call for anybody that would like to speak on this issue. At this time, I will close the public hearing. That moves us on to item 15.
Request for approval of resolution providing for remodeling of 401 South Main related to the State Historical Preservation Office's ruling.
This item is on the agenda and would authorize the Halloran Building LLC to move forward with the plans to remodel the building at 401 South Main. I'll give the city attorney a chance to speak on this item.
Mr. Mayor, your resolution on this issue is fairly short. It's fairly conclusory, that you find that there are no feasible and prudent alternatives, and that the project has included all possible planning to minimize harm. I would encourage you, after a motion and a second, to have discussion amongst yourselves about those factors that we've talked about. I can certainly assist you in terms of creating some findings in your minutes, depending on which way you want to go. If there's not a motion to approve the resolution, then it doesn't really matter. We don't have to worry so much about findings. But if you get a motion and a second, I would welcome the opportunity as your discussion continues. If you want suggestions on findings or kind of guiding through what you've heard this morning to make it match up with the law that you're applying here to the facts, we can certainly assist you with that.
Okay. This time, I will entertain a motion on item 15.
Mr. Mayor,
Commissioner.
I move that we approve the item 15, providing for the remodeling of 401 South Main, and vote to override the decision of the State Historical Preservation Office.
Okay, is there a second?
I'd second that.
It's been moved and seconded. As such, is there any discussion?
I would like to say a few things in that regard. I look at this as the natural evolution of that building. It has evolved from a lumberyard to an automotive center to a clothing, garment manufacturing building. The garment industry changed dramatically when it started being offshored in probably the late 60s, early 70s. I think this has been vacant probably from the early 70s to the mid 70s in that regard. And the building has already been modified a number of times since its conception. The developer has been very aware of the design that he wants to do to that building as far as preserving its general appearance, even restoring some of the early elements of the building. So we appreciate that. We also appreciate that we have all wanted to bring more business and more activity to the downtown area. That's going to happen if this building goes forward. We've done everything, I think he's done everything to minimize any harm to the general area. In fact, they actually enhance the positive attractions to that general area. And also upgrade as the chief spoke to, upgrade the safety of the building, the mechanical systems, the wiring, the heating, the cooling. And also I'm very aware of the historical preservation doesn't take into account the energy efficiency of the modern buildings. So that will be an additional, I think, positive factor. I can't help but think of my time as a realtor in downtown Kansas City, watching vacant buildings that were former garment buildings evolve from vacant with birds in them and broken windows in them to very expensive apartments and art studios and other things, while maintaining their historic perspective and appearance. And that's been very, very good for the downtown of Kansas City, Missouri. As I think this renovation and development of this project will be very, very good for downtown Ottawa. So I think it's an exciting project.
Further discussion?
I agree with Commissioner Wygand here with his comments, and I also want to state that I appreciate the State Historical Preservation Office and their work, and I agree. I think it's important to preserve our history. At the same time, I also appreciate the home rule, and they respect that, and they delegate this down to our level to make the decision. So I appreciate their willingness on that too.
Okay.
I agree with both commissioners also, and I think that the windows that we keep discussing, I think if you, as Josh had pointed out before, the material that Josh will be using has been used quite often downtown with replacing a lot of the windows that we've already replaced on existing buildings. I think this is a great idea. The only concern I would have, and I'm sure the community development has already looked into it, would be if we do have 38 beds up there and the full downstairs being used, that we might have some parking issues, but we can probably get to that when, that's a good problem to have, I guess.
We actually are looking at parking timing, but the owner has acquired actually parking for residents.
Good, thank you.
And I might mention that we're really blessed in this community to have so many historical buildings. The downtown district, as I've said before, is really the front room of our community. It's the area that our community identifies as ownership. Even though our citizens do not own the buildings, they do feel like they have ownership in the downtown district. When I first came to this community in the late 80s, 87, the North American Hotel was in a very poor repair. Like Commissioner Wygand said, birds had made their way into the building, and I do know that the pigeons that they had to clean out several inches of pigeon droppings over the years in order just to make that building serviceable. It had to have some a feasible or a purpose in order to make that renovation feasible for that developer. This building has to have a purpose, a use, in order to make it feasible for Mr. Walker to develop it. And that I think he has identified a use for the building that will make that feasible, and he is making that choice to make the investment in our community. which I applaud. Mr. Walker has done many great things for our community and has been a good partner, corporate partner of a lot of the options that we do. He has indicated that he considered alternatives for the project and made his decision based on what was going to be feasible on a very thin margin of profit in order to do so, and based upon the use that's going to make it happen. Personally, I feel that that an alternative that the SHPO had indicated of letting the building sit vacant for a number of years until another use came along or another investor came along is not an option that I'm willing to take. The second floor of this building, half the building, has sat idle for 40 years, 50 years.
At least, yeah.
And that is not doing anybody any good. So I believe that this is the best, most feasible and prudent use of the property, and I agree with those commissioners that have already spoken. Is there any further discussion? City Attorney.
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, you have heard, I think, two alternatives. One is the notion of dropping the canted corner and leaving the frontal elevation of the building the same, which is the SHPO's recommendation. You also heard a suggestion from Ms. Starsnick-Dean about preserving the windows on the second floor. You've heard response from the applicant as to why those may not fit within the design. They may not fit within the technical scope. You've heard from Ms. Lee about how there's concerns with those in terms of the comprehensive plan for the community. And you've also heard the economic argument from the applicant about that adding cost to the project that may make the project not economically feasible to move forward. So are there other alternatives, or including those, that you wish to have staff gather additional information about, or do you feel that you have sufficient information to make your decision that neither of those alternatives are feasible and prudent, and that there are no other alternatives you want us to explore?
Okay.
So it sounds like there's consensus that we've explored all the available alternatives, you found them wanting, and there are no other additional alternatives that you want staff to explore on your behalf at this time. Okay. Thank you.
Appears to be it. Okay. Is there any further discussion?
If in, let's just say it's sat idle, and what would be the historical perspective on and demolition of that building eventually?
We would be right back here having it this.
They would oppose, as they have on several other occasions, and it would be a far more difficult challenge, and frankly, far more disastrous for the community.
That's the alternative.
Okay. Any further discussion? If not, let's proceed to vote.
How do you vote, Commissioner Crowley?
Yes.
Commissioner Skidmore?
Yes.
Commissioner Wygand?
Yes.
Mayor Jorgensen?
And I vote yes. Motion carries. That'll move us on to item 16.
2019 Renewable Energy Certificate Directive.
Renewable energy certificates, or RECs, are market-based, legally recognized tradable instruments that are issued for every 1 megawatt hour of electricity generated at qualifying renewable energy facilities. By retiring an REC, its owner can make the claim of being green or renewable. By selling an REC, the environmental attributes can be transferred to another entity in exchange for revenue, so the buyer can meet a voluntary standard or comply with an RPS. And we have our Utility Director, Dennis Tharp, to speak on behalf of this item.
Good morning again, Mayor and Commissioners. I don't think I can say it much better than what you just read. We've talked about this before. I think a point that I want to make that was made as we talked about this in study session is our overall power supply budget runs between $9 and $12 million. At the end of the day, what we take from these renewable energy credits is a very, very small piece of that. Now, this can go either way, and we can change it to one way now, and as you know, we can change it again next year. But we do have at least one, and I would say a couple of inquiries from industry in town asking for us to be able to issue a certificate of how much green energy that we provide to their business. By retiring these RECs, we believe that we can do that at that point in time. You all listened to a presentation from KMEA, Kansas Municipal Energy Agency, that said that as a municipal, we are about 30% renewable, 36% renewable products. So our belief is, and in talking with KMEA, that we can provide those certificates that then help those businesses or industries in town that that need or want to provide that. Further, we begin to look at the possibility of owning and selling to those that might be interested in that process. I believe we're going to see more and more of this as we go along. We have some of the Googles and Amazons of the world, the Walmarts of the world that are buying these credits right now and selling them into the market. So I believe at this point in time it's prudent for us to consider, at least for a year, to retire these credits and see what it looks like when we talk again in a year.
So,
And I would
Mr.
stand
Tharp,
for
just
any questions.
clarify that, so we can keep them this year and sell them next year and go back and forth as
Yes, we
much as we
can.
want? Okay.
Yes.
And I think you mentioned one other time, too, how companies are looking to that. You said existing companies here in our community, but also might prospective industries looking at our community see that we are green and maybe a filler of our proximity park. This would help sell that.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that our city manager mentioned that in our conversation, that this is a great economic development tool.
And approximately how many dollars are we talking about giving up if we were to?
The exact number
Sale.
is $15,782.87, $15,782.87.
And that comes in the form of reduced cost of energy on a budget.
We do
of
not
where you
receive a
purchase-
check for that.
Okay.
Yes, that
So
is
it's
a
coupon.
credit.
We get a
on-
coupon, like going to the grocery store and
Yeah.
providing a
Yeah,
coupon.
we can look at it like
Mayor,
that, yeah.
otherwise known as a credit memo.
Credit memo, there you go.
Can you tell us approximately how much of our energy is generated by renewables?
At this point in time, we are approximately 36% renewable.
And
Yes.
mostly wind?
Most of that is wind. Yeah, there's a little bit of hydro on that, but the vast majority of that is wind. We own 8 megawatts through the Buckeye Wind Farm, which is out west, and then we own 2.5 megawatts off the Marshall Wind Farm, which is up north in Marshall County.
Thank you.
And just for the record, that amount amounts to about 0.15% of our total budget in the electric department, if we're figuring 10 million.
Yes, it's very, very small.
Very small, yeah.
Okay. All right, at this time, I would entertain a motion to either keep or retire or sell our renewable energy certificates.
I'd move we retire them.
Is there a second?
I'd second.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, let's proceed to vote.
How do you vote, Commissioner Crowley?
Yes.
Commissioner Skidmore?
Yes.
Commissioner Wygant?
Yes.
Mayor Jorgensen?
And I vote yes, motion carries. Yep. That'll move us on to item 17.
Request for approval of resolution setting the time and place and providing for notice of a public hearing for the consideration of condemnation of property located at 703 South Cherry.
The resolution established a public hearing to be held at 7 p.m. on Wednesday, August 7th, 2019, for the consideration of the condemnation of a single-family structure located at 703 South Cherry. We have Ms. Lee to speak on behalf of this item.
Good morning again. Unfortunately, our chief building official, Terry Elmer, he was here for this presentation, but we have court at the same time, so he has gone over there in order to take care of that. So I'm going to cover We're asking you to pass the resolutions to call the public hearings for 3 structures, the first of which is 703 South Cherry. And at those hearings, we would ask you to give some consideration to condemning them and ordering them removed, or in 2 cases, removed or repaired. The first property is 703 South Cherry. In 2017, we received contact from the Ottawa Police Department about whether the structure should be occupied because they had evidence of concern. And so we've communicated with the owner. We continue to do that through this year. There hasn't been a resolution for that. We did board the structure, by the way, but the taxes are delinquent. We discussed that on Monday as well. We believe the structure to be dilapidated and a blight. We continue to get complaints about it, and so we would request that you pass the resolution. We do want to make a note that there is a residential, another primary structure on this property along with an accessory structure. They would not be subject to this. This is for the structure that we've identified in the images, so I show you here. That is addressed 703 South Cherry. The findings are here that have been filed with you, and if anyone wants to look at those, they may. These are the typical statute requirement findings. Some of the conditions of the interior are demonstrated up here between debris and health hazards, as well as water infiltration to the unit. As I said, we've boarded and secured the structure, but it is clearly not contributing to the neighborhood.
Is this a local owner, or have they responded to your
No, we
request or letter?
have not had satisfactory response. The owner is local, yes. It's in a family situation.
Okay. That covers everything on 703 South Cherry?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mrs. Lee, if I may?
Yes, sir.
It said taxes were delinquent. Can you tell me how many years?
Yes. Sorry, I wasn't
You're right.
proofed up for this.
I thought it was 2013.
I think it is 2013, but I
know there were.
I have it in here, so.
It says, well, that's the wrong address.
It does have it in.
That's the.
That's the 830. The other one, I think it just said taxes are delinquent.
Oh. Yeah.
Maybe this one has not been. This one, they may be paid up because of the other structure. Sorry, there's so many things in this file.
And we can probably talk about that at the
And we
hearing.
will, but I'm happy to get it for you. It's here. It's
And
just
was
photos.
it boarded up because there was
Continue to be issues with entry.
entry?
Uh-huh.
Okay, not to
And-
prevent, because there was entry.
To prevent entry in animals, I think was what the concern was as well.
Gotcha.
We had asked them not to be in the structure, and it was reported to us that I think that was continuing.
The
to
property owner?
happen.
Okay.
People in the family.
Or, okay.
I'm not finding the taxes on this one, so
Okay.
I wouldn't want to say that. It's entirely possible this one's paid up.
Okay. At this time, I would entertain a motion to approve a resolution setting the time and place for a hearing.
I so move.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded as such. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, let's proceed to vote.
Yes.
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 And I vote yes. Motion carries. That moves us to item 18.
Request for approval of resolution setting the time and place and providing for notice of a public hearing for the consideration and condemnation of the property located at 830 South Ave.
Now, these, the past one and the next two are very similar, but we'll read the motions and the comments entirely. This resolution establishes a public hearing to be held at 7 p.m. on Wednesday, August 7th, 2019, for the consideration of the condemnation of a single-family and accessory structure located at 830 South Elm Street.
Mr. Mayor and Commission, with your indulgence, I did find it for 703. They have been delinquent since 2015.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so 830 South Elm. This structure, we have been writing for a much longer period of time, since 2009 is when we originally approached them about conditions and concerns about the roof. And we have had communication with the owner. However, they really never did address the concerns. The structure has deteriorated significantly in that time, and as you would expect, and as we even talked about earlier today, once the structure is vacant and no one's making any effort to do anything about it, it will go downhill fairly quickly. So we have, I've got a brief history up there, but I also know you've had these in file, and I'm happy to show those to anyone. This one, the taxes have been delinquent since 2013. We have not had any recent communication, and we do recommend that you pass the resolution to give those owners or agents an opportunity to come and address the structure. Here are the findings relative to this structure, and it does include an accessory structure that would also be removed should the ultimate designation of condemnation be done and the owner continue to not take any action. You can see there the roof at the time, and it just simply needs to be removed. So that's where we are with that one. Well, you can still repair, but it's...
At this time, I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make that motion to approve item 18.
I'll say.
It's been moved and seconded as such to approve the resolution as described in item 18. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, let's proceed to vote.
How do you vote, Commissioner Skidmore?
Yes.
Commissioner Wygand?
Yes.
Commissioner Crowley?
Yes.
Mayor Jorgensen?
I vote yes, motion carries. Let's move to item 19.
Request for approval of resolution setting the time and place and providing for notice of a public hearing for the consideration of condemnation of property located at 1007 South Locust.
This resolution establishes a public hearing to be held at 7:00 p.m. on Wednesday, August 7th, 2019, for the consideration of the condemnation of a single-family and accessory structure located at 1007 South Locust Street.
Okay, two things in contrast to the previous two situations. One, this one, the taxes are current, which is kind of interesting because our recommendation on this one is that it not be given an opportunity to repair. So we'll just be clear with the community about this. While this one hasn't been in our system as long, its status from a structural soundness and safety is egregious and simply needs to be removed. So we had communicated with the owner. They indicated to us that they were going to remove it. They did not take any action to do that. They have continued to communicate to us that they would remove it. We would really appreciate that because if that were to happen, it would save some city funds so that we could look at some of our other structures. So we would again ask that this structure be put on notice for that hearing so that they could come and talk to us. If it is removed prior to that hearing date, we would advise you and withdraw it from a need to take action. You can see from this one that the roof is literally collapsing in and it just needs to go away. There are members of the community that have communicated to us about this one as well. And as I said to you on Monday, we have in the last couple of years had some situations that have warranted them getting ahead of our schedule as far as consideration and push some of these other structures behind because they've either done petitions or there's been a fire where there's been kind of an immediate need to go in and remove a structure. As we have a budget for these items, then we haven't taken the next step to condemn it, because once we've condemned it, I really do believe that it is incumbent on us then to spend the dollars to remove it, because I think we have now stepped into it from a jurisdiction standpoint. So if this one is removed, we will bring you at least one more before the end of the year, and probably we will bring some anyway so that they would be prepared. We would be prepared at early 2020 to take action if need be.
Okay. All right, at this time, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion to provide that public hearing for the consideration and condemnation of that property located at 1007 South Locust.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded as such. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, let's proceed to vote.
How do you vote, Commissioner Crowley?
Yes.
Commissioner Skidmore?
Yes.
Commissioner Weigand?
Yes.
Mayor Jorgensen?
I vote yes, motion carries. Item 20.
Request, request for approval of ordinance amending Article 2, Rules, Interpretations, and Definitions, and Article 24, Supplemental District Regulations of the zoning regulations.
The Planning Commission reviewed the proposed amendments to the zoning regulations and recommends approval by a vote of 5-0. We have our Planning Director, Ms. Lee, to discuss this item.
As was noted, this is to replace the definition of fence, and then in the district that, or in the article in the zoning regulations that refers to the requirements for fences, that definition also be replaced. This definition puts us in conformance with the building code, so that there's not really a question of whether, if you hear from a building staff member, yes, you can do this, that you don't hear something in contrast from the zoning or vice versa. So we want to be as consistent as possible, and so we asked the Planning Commission for their support on that, and they agreed. And so the new definition of fence would be means an enclosure, wall, or partition constructed of ornamental iron, chain link, plastic, or vinyl, fabricated as fencing material, masonry, stone, and rot-resistant wood, which encloses or divides a lot or parcel of land.
Good. At this time, I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'll
Commissioner.
make a motion to approve item 20 as on our agenda.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded as such. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, let's proceed to vote.
How do you vote, Commissioner Crowley?
Yes.
Commissioner Skidmore?
Yes.
Commissioner Weigand?
Yes.
Mayor Jorgensen?
I vote yes, motion carries. Item 21.
Request for approval of funding agreement for Ottawa Main Street.
The agreement for funding is to approve a contract beginning July 1st, 2019 through December 31st of 2019. I guess we do have a public comment on this item. Becky Schisler. And Becky, for the record, can you state your name and address?
Becky Schisler, 520 South Cedar, Ottawa.
Okay.
I am here on behalf of the Ottawa Main Street program and ask that you would continue to fund them. The program, as of right now, has done all that you've asked for their budget requirements. In fact, they've taken $2,000 out of the cost of their program to get this audit that you had previously asked for. When we think about the funds that Main Street has, $5,000 cut is a lot. As a matter of fact, $50 for Ottawa Main Street is a lot. If it's, as you know, most of the money that the city pays goes to pay the director. And to be a part of the new Kansas Main Street program, which is about to start again, we have to have a full-time director. So this money, if it's cut, would, or if you are not funding them completely, would have to come from the program. It would be almost impossible to have a director. And again, we have to have one, a full-time director, in order to be a part of the Kansas Main Street. When we think about what's been going on downtown in the last 2 years, we have a lot of great things happening, but the road construction and the construction of the park behind First Street has cost in sales to many of the merchants. In fact, I've talked to several of them, and some of them have even expressed the fact that they've lost 50% off of their sales. And so it's hurt the downtown as a whole. But looking forward, it's going to help the downtown as a whole. When we look at the new industrial park that we have out here, we're, as the governing body and as the city, we know that whatever cost and rightly so, whatever cost is very, very important. And so we really have to look at the downtown the same way and think that if we lost half of our merchants there, it's not going to be appealing to anyone who wants to bring industry into our town. And we think about the industry, we offer tax incentives and so forth. Well, the downtown merchants, the small businesses, really don't get these type of incentives offered. So they struggle, and then with what's been going on, it's a constant struggle even more with the construction and all. And so it becomes very difficult for some of them to survive. And then that's where Main Street comes in. We're the advocate for these small businesses, even at the state level, and it's going to even be getting better because of what the state is going to be able to offer our program. When we think about the director, she spends more than 50 hours a week, and she's doing this to help the businesses. She's there on Saturdays when other people have Saturdays off. If there's an event, regardless of whether it's a Main Street event or not, if it's something that's going to benefit the downtown, she's there. She's there after hours. She goes home at night. I know this for a fact because of what I've went through. She goes home at night and her mind still works, and she's thinking constantly what's going to help the Main Street program succeed, what's going to help the downtown succeed. And, you know, the hardest part of that, it isn't the 50 or more hours that you spend. The hardest part is worrying about where the money's going to come from if it's cut. Because all of these programs take money, as we all know. And these businesses that are down there, these are the ones that are going to be spending money here in our town, at our churches, at our schools, at your banks. They're the ones that's going to be reinvesting in Ottawa. So they need to have an advocate that's going to do whatever and spend whatever time that's needed to help them succeed. And to cut the money would almost be fatal in the thought of having that advocate. In the past, we've had grants that are no longer available because maybe it was just for a certain period of time. And membership right now isn't at its all-time high because the businesses are struggling because of the past 2 years of the things that have been happening. So what you give to the program is vital to these small businesses. And when we look at the future and we look at the fact that we've got all these new things happening, trails, new industry, new hotel, you know, everything that's happening in Ottawa, it becomes even more important that, as you mentioned, downtown being the living room, it's even more important for that to be at its best. And the Ottawa Main Street is what's working to focus on making that its best. So I would really like you to consider continuing in what you're funding Main Street, continuing to back the programs that we have, and to help us in making things even better for the future.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Schisler. Do I hear a motion on item 21?
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion, but I'd like to change some of these numbers that we were given earlier as a suggestion. I understand that total reductions would be $12,489. We're looking at $2,500 being taken away from Willow for various reasons. That leaves, my numbers are right, $9,989. If I take that and divide that by what was budgeted for Ottawa Main Street and FCDC for the rest of this year, that'd be $47,500. That'd be 21.03% of this money, $9,989. And if we take that times each proposed budget for what was left to be budgeted for Ottawa Main Street and FCDC, that would put $3,154 reduction for Ottawa Main Street and $6,835 reduction for FCDC. I think that'd be more appropriate distribution.
Can you
or
indicate those
appropriation.
numbers again?
Ottawa Main Street would be 3,154, and FCDC be 6,835, if my numbers are right. That'd be a more appropriate, I feel like it's disproportionate to require almost 5,000 from each one, being that the budgets are quite different.
Okay. Are you
And that'd
making
be
a
my
motion, Mike?
That'd be my motion, too.
And what is the motion?
That we would reduce Main Street 3,154 and FCDC 6,835, and that numbers should add up correctly if I'm right.
Okay. And so the contract has a line for funding. So are you proposing 15,000 less 3,154?
Right.
Okay.
And on FCDC be 32,500 less 6,835. And that would be right down to the dollar as far as the proportionate share.
I'd like to make a comment if possible, Mayor.
Commissioner. Oh, wait a minute. I think there's a motion there.
If it dies for lack of second?
Well, I'm trying to figure out the motion here. So that motion would be to fund the contract for $11,846 for the remainder of the year.
Yes, I guess I didn't subtract that out, but okay. And then that's for Main Street.
Is there a second for the motion?
I'd second that.
It's moved and seconded as such. Is there any discussion? Commissioner Wygant.
Yes, I'd like to, I don't believe in death by 1,000 cuts. What we're talking about here is, now it's 3,000, it was 5,000. I think our fundamental concern with the Main Street program is the productivity, the success, whether it's a viable program, whether we could use the money alternatively and accomplish the same goals. But to cut them incrementally just reduces the opportunity for that response. I think that my proposal and would be to fund them for the rest of this year at their $15,000 level, continuing to pursue their improvement and their their return on investment. Perhaps have some of their members testify to what they have done. Ms. Schisler spoke to the 50% loss of income for some of the businesses affected by the construction, how they helped. And I don't know how they helped. I don't think a lot of people know how they helped. What is their use? How do they do it? How do they go about it? Can those businesses testify that they helped? And I think to just reduce them or 3,000 to our budget is not a great deal. 3,000 to their budget is a great deal. It's a 10,000. It's a 10%, actually 20% cut in the 15,000 that they've been previously expected. So I would encourage us to reconsider the motion, and that's what I want to comment about.
I would just like to ask
We have a
where
motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion?
I guess I'd like to know the source of the funding, though. If we have to cut this $12,489, and if we keep it where it is, where's that money coming from? City Manager?
Well, Commissioners, this fund is a transfer fund. We transfer out general fund, we transfer out of electric, we transfer out of water to fund all these organizations. So the only thing we could do is fall back and go back to those funds for transfers, okay? So what that would mean is that you would then affect your operating budgets of those city departments that are in those funds, because this is a transfer fund. This is not a tax-supported fund. This is a transfer fund into there. And the purpose of suggesting the reductions was so we did not have to do those transfers into that fund.
Is there any further discussion on the motion on the table?
Well, it's unfortunate Sarah's not here. I'd have liked to have known what her opinion is on all this, too. I value her assessment as well, but do we need to decide this today? We're getting close to July 1, I realize.
I believe we indicated that we'd decide something today on it. And is there any further discussion?
Well, let me say again about these transfers, and I don't like doing that. And, I feel like in some ways it's the Bank of Utilities. Sometimes we utilize them a lot of times for funding other departments. I don't like doing that, and I know it's a tough decision. I know that our Main Street people are creative. I'm sure they can come up with some ways to raise some money. I realize also that our merchants have suffered this year, so I agree with what Tom has said. It's been a tough year for a lot of people. But at the same time, I still feel like those transfers are a difficult thing to assess on one department versus the other. I don't know.
The motion on the table is to approve a contract for the remaining months of the year in the amount of $11,846. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, let's proceed to vote.
How do you vote, Commissioner Wygand?
Yes.
How do you vote, Commissioner Crowley?
Yes.
Commissioner Skidmore?
Yes?
Mayor Jorgensen?
And I vote yes, motion carries. That moves us on to reports by the city manager.
Well, I don't have anything, Commissioners.
Reports by city commissioners, we have Eric,
I have none.
Tom,
I have none.
Mike.
I just want to say a shout out to Matt Simonson. I understand you're quite famous in Ottawa, Canada now, so congratulations. Keep that relationship going, and you may be the mayor of Ottawa, Canada someday, so keep it up. But I appreciate what you're doing. I think it's great to get our name out there. I also might mention about potholes. I know a lot of people have mentioned those before, and I've seen a few, I've reported a few, and they've been fixed within a few days. And so I would suggest people, if you find a pothole on your street or see one on another street, report it to publicworks@ottawaks.gov, and I think you'll be impressed with their quick response. We need the eyes of the people in Ottawa to look at, see where these potholes are, and I know they'll get it fixed quickly. And so, Michael, congratulations on your department. Keep that going, and I think it's a great way to get the word out where this needs to be addressed. So thank you. That's all I had.
That moves us on to reports by the mayor. We do have a meeting in less than an hour with a joint city-county USD 290. This will be at the district office. Our next study session will be on June 24th. And then on Tuesday, June 25th, there'll be a retirement reception for Lieutenant Brent Macklin from 2 to 4 at the fire station with remarks and presentation at 3 o'clock. At this time, is there anything further to come before this meeting? Hearing none, we'll consider it adjourned.